Executive Director of the Maryland Women's Heritage Center, and we're so happy that you are here with us. This is an exciting panel because Anna Ella Carroll was an unsung heroine. Some of the old-timers that Frank will tell you about did learn about her 70 years ago, but she got lost in between, and now she's being brought back into history. And the person who helped coordinate all of this is our new Managing Director of the Maryland Women's Heritage Center, Diana Bailey, and I'd like her to just introduce.
Nice to see everyone, and it's great to finally, this was, I think I started like the 20th of September, and Jill and Linda said, oh, by the way, we have a 3-day event coming, so it's exciting. We were at Katie Caljean's place last night at the Maryland Historical Society, but today's panel is going to be a little bit different in that last night it was really a lot more about the Civil War and Anna Carroll. But about, Linda, help me, or Jean, when was the World War II thing here? September. In September, the Heritage Center with Linda, Lindsay, and Jean coordinated bringing out the story of women in World War II in particular, including Rosie the Riveter and any number of other people. So we're looking again at Anna Ella Carroll, but we're also focusing today on the women in the military. So we have bringing Anna Ella Carroll to the forefront, but also looking at women in the military today and the obstacles and the opportunities. So we're thrilled that Ann Quasman is with us to moderate today. You should all have at your seat the program that also included last night in the panel members if you want to do more research after. The panel names today, and you'll have an opportunity at the end. Kay has her book on the table as well as June has her book on the table. So those will be for your review and sale if you're interested when you leave. Other than that, we're going to have, you see that Loretto is taping. If you need to move, please go behind. We don't want to see your pretty purple shirt in our videotape. And there'll be more information about next steps. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our moderator, Ann Quasman, who is from Women Talk Live.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. It's so exciting to be here. Welcome to the second event in Rediscovering Anna Ella Carroll's, the whole series. And this is exciting for me because not a Marylander, being raised in Virginia, this has been a learning experience for me for the first time. And so I look forward to hearing from our panel of distinguished experts. And we're fortunate to have 3 really knowledgeable individuals who have unique perspectives and expertise on Anna Ella Carroll and also on women in the military in general. And so let me tell you a little bit about each one of these before they get started, and you will understand while they are on this panel. They've all done so much, and we would spend the rest of the afternoon me telling you about them if I read their bios, because they're so incredibly long and full of information. And so if you'd like to know more about them, just request and we'll get the information to you. But our first speaker today is going to be Kay Larson, and she's a scholar and author of military history known for her 2004 publication, Great Necessities, The Life, Times, and Writings of Anna Ella Carroll, 1815 to 1894. Kay pioneered the study of women's roles in the Civil War and World War II. She serves on the board of the New York Military Affairs Symposium and is a contributor to the New York Times Disunion Civil War blog. From 1995 to 2004, Kay was Chief of Staff at the National Committee on American Foreign Policy. That was the lead American organization involved in the Northern Ireland peace process, and also the organization that held unofficial talks between civilian representatives of China and Taiwan. So our format today, as you can tell, we've got some powerhouses sitting up here with us today, and we ask that they'll be presenting on their topic, and we ask that you hold your questions until the end because we're going to reserve at least half an hour at the end for you to ask any questions that you have. And so starting us off will be Kay Larson talking about Anna Ella Carroll's role in military history.
Thank you very much, Ann. I'm thrilled to be here and thrilled that we have actually a really good group here today. I'm telling a bit of a complicated story because her military role, of course, is not, it's complicated, and then her hearings are complicated, and then to combine the two gets more complicated. So I hope I can do this in an organized way that everybody will understand. The idea for this topic came out of one of our planning meetings, where I said, this last summer, where I said, to my mind, you can draw a direct line between the case of Anna Ella Carroll and how she was suffered through 27 years of congressional hearings to get reimbursed by the Congress for war services and recognition for war services, which constituted the whole length of her case before Congress. So you can draw a direct line between that case and the current scandal going on in the Pentagon and the military about the vast increase, proportional increase in the sexual assault cases in the military. According to the New York Times, in May, from 2010 to 2012, the percentage of sexual assault cases of both, I should add, women and men, increased by more than 30%, 26,000 cases. And currently, or at least as of August, there are 1,600 cases in the legal military justice pipeline. So what I'm saying is that Carroll's case in some ways represents the first kind of assault on a female in terms of her women being a source of legitimate sources of military power. As I think most of us know organizationally, most cases of sexual harassment, which has also been my experience, perhaps not sexual assault so much, in an organization are not about sex, it's about power and equality. So if a man sees a woman in the same position as he is, and he feels that the woman is inferior, is not equal to himself, sex is used as a way of harassing and intimidating the woman out of the organization. And so, so again, the issue is not about sex, it's about women's legitimate military and political authority. So Carroll was really the first woman, and what makes her unique is it was an individual case where the top levels of the national government considered her as a legitimate source of military and political authority. And after 27 years, the Congress never voted a relief bill and therefore did not recognize her authority. So she suffered as a result of, emotionally and physically suffered, and financially suffered as a result of those hearings. So in some ways you can make the case that Congress made an assault on her. So I think you can make that direct line between Carroll and the current scandal, again, because it's the same issue of women being legitimate sources of military and political authority. So let me first describe generally the case before Congress and then describe what she did militarily in a little more biographical details. And for those of you who heard me last night, sorry, you're going to have to hear a little bit of repetition. Carroll first submitted her claim to Congress in 1870. The hearings went on through several Congresses up until actually 3 years after her death in 1897. 4 military committees of the Congress were convened during that period. All 4 committees voted favorably on the facts of her case. In other words, they said that Carroll did what she said she did, and high levels of the Lincoln administration testified on her behalf, verifying this. Only one committee report that got Carroll hearing in the 1870s did not recommend payment on the spurious notion that she didn't risk her life in the national cause and therefore deserved no money, and that she'd already been paid $2,000, which is not really accurate because she was paid $1,200 for her publications, but that was for the cost of the publication. It wasn't really for her. So that was kind of silliness. Anyway, but the 1881 Bragg report, headed by General E.S. Bragg from the state of Wisconsin, where I come from, his committee reported out that the facts of Carroll's case had been incontestably established, and the country owed her large compensation and honors. And I'll reference the Bragg committee again. So that's that's the outlines of her case. But let me tell you what she did to come to the Congress. And I'll give you a little more background at this point on Carroll herself. She was born in the Eastern Shore in Somerset County, also lived in Dorchester County, where Frank and I are from. And she was the daughter of Governor Thomas King Carroll, who served as governor in 1830. Beginning in 1850, he received an appointment to the Fillmore administration that ushered daughter and father onto the national political stage. During the 1850s, she became a nationally known publicist and political operative for 3 presidential candidates. Maryland was a moderate state, and she supported moderates, and therefore didn't win because the country was becoming radical on both sides of the issue. And so by the time Lincoln came into office, Carroll either knew or had access to every member of his cabinet. She was already well acquainted with William Seward, the new Secretary of State, and was a good friend of Thurlow Weed, his alter ego. She also knew Attorney General Edward Bates. So Carroll had also served as the major publicist for Thomas H. Hicks, who was the loyal Union war governor of Maryland. He had stated that he owed his election to her writings. They were actually next door neighbors in Dorchester County. So it was largely due to Hicks that he did not call the state legislature into session in the spring of 1861 that kept Maryland loyal, and also he said Carroll's writings were extremely influential, writing pro-Hicks and pro-Lincoln writings. So one of her first pamphlets responding to a speech of Senator John C. Breckinridge of Kentucky, where he said that the president was making war in the South, and Carroll countered that no, everything he was doing was constitutional. She'd also been trained in constitutional law by her father. She gave these pamphlets to Assistant Secretary of War Thomas Scott and Attorney General Bates. Lincoln received a copy. He asked Scott to ask Carroll to continue to write for his administration. And that's the source for her coming to the Congress and asking for money after the war. So she ended up writing 3 pamphlets for the War Department. Scott originally paid her $1,200 out of his own pocket. They published 10,000 copies of her Breckinridge pamphlet to circulate in Maryland. The other 3 pamphlets she wrote for Lincoln were the war powers of the government, the power of the president to suspend the writ of habeas corpus examined, and the relation of the national government to the revolted citizens combined, which dealt with emancipation issues. So all of these pamphlets were on legal constitutional issues dealing with the president's war powers. So that's military in and of itself. Then, as if Carroll wasn't doing enough for the Union, she took up a spy role. So in October 1861, she goes out to St. Louis with a man named Lemuel Evans, who was a secret agent appointed by Seward for Texas and Mexico. He had been a congressman from East Texas. He had discussed with Commanding General John Fremont in St. Louis in August the idea of staging at least some kind of counter-rebellion, if not invasion of Texas, to at least get part of the control of the Rio Grande. He came back to Washington, reported to Seward, and then he and Carroll left again for St. Louis. She went with him with a specific purpose to spy on the head librarian of the Mercantile Library in St. Louis, a man named Edward William Johnston. Now I'm sure all of you are sitting there saying, who? Well, of course you should know. However, he did have a famous brother, and his famous brother was Confederate General Joseph E. Johnston, who had headed Confederate forces in Virginia. So Carroll learned a lot about the secessionists' smug notions about how they were going to win the war, that they would soon have all of Missouri back, Johnston's forces in Kentucky that had invaded the neutral state would be at the Ohio border in a few months. The Union River expedition that was being planned down the Mississippi, they were building gunboats and were going to have an army force to descend the Mississippi, open up the trade, use it as a stage of invasion. That would never succeed, according to the secessionists. So Carroll decided to take matters in her own hands. She interviewed a riverboat pilot. He said the Mississippi expedition, the Confederates were right, would never succeed. There are many defensible points in the river. It would take years to open it up. It was going to be a disaster. So Carroll says, what about the Tennessee and the Cumberland River? which goes, if you see, that's why I circulated the map. If you see the Tennessee and Cumberland River flow kind of straight through Kentucky and Tennessee, and at the bottom on the Kentucky-Tennessee border, you'll see Forts Henry and Donaldson. And if you actually go into southern Tennessee, there is the Memphis-Charleston Railroad, which is one of the few lateral lines connecting Memphis to actually Virginia and South Carolina through some spur lines. So, so Carroll says, what about the Tennessee River? Scott says it's much more feasible. He gives her all kinds of navigation details. By this time, Evans enters the room, corroborates this meeting later. Carroll writes, they pour over railroad maps, and Evans specifically testified to his memory of going over these maps. She draws up a plan, sends it to the Lincoln administration, saying that the Union should invade the Confederacy in the West through the Tennessee River and not the Mississippi River. And their main objective should be cutting the Memphis-Charleston Railroad, which very early on then would have cut the Confederacy in two, and isolating Memphis would have flanked the positions north on the Mississippi River, and the Confederates would have to abandon them. So the Lincoln administration adopts this plan, partly due to an intercession of Benjamin Wade, who was the chairman of the Committee on the Conduct of the War. Wade testified to this later, and basically says, Mr. President, you're in the last extremity. This is the only feasible move. It's got to be done now. I think Edwin Stanton, who was the War Counsel of the War Department, is the man to do it. He goes to Stanton. Stanton agrees the plan is the move to make. Stanton's appointed on January, confirmed by the Senate on January 15th. The testimony of Scott and Wade on Carroll's behalf is that the Lincoln administration adopted her Tennessee River campaign. Stanton was appointed to implement it. But meanwhile, we have a kicker in the situation. Out west, Henry Halleck, who took over from Fremont, is also planning the Tennessee River campaign, but unbeknownst to anybody. It's a long story. It has to do with McClellan, and McClellan was discussing strategy with other people, which didn't work out. Meanwhile, Halleck is quietly working on this with the naval commander, Andrew Foote. So events intervene, but meanwhile, Lincoln is also supervising the whole operation. Foote is sending daily reports on the progress of the gunboats. Lincoln orders a reconnaissance of the Tennessee River, which Evans states was based on Carroll's plan. So now everybody's in the mix on this. At the end of January 1862, they have to make a move earlier than they thought originally up the Tennessee River. Oh, and actually Halleck had written this kind of secret memo that's buried in the war records telling McClellan, the commander-in-chief of the Army, that the true line of advance is the Tennessee River. So now we have both Halleck in the West and Lincoln in Washington both now eyeing the Tennessee River. Lincoln based on Carroll's plan. So they learn that reinforcements are going west. Eric Panic hits the street. McClellan tells Halleck that he's got to, again, that they fear reinforcements are going to Tennessee. Halleck orders Ulysses Grant the next day, who's in charge of the field forces, to move on Fort Henry on the Tennessee River. And that night then, and this is critical, Assistant Secretary of War Thomas Scott, to whom Carroll submitted the plan, was directed to go west by Stanton to organize reinforcements for Grant and Foote. Part of Halleck's memo to McClellan stated that although the Tennessee River was the best strategic line of invasion, he would require 60,000 reinforcements from all over the Midwest. And so Scott was to coordinate with all the governors who had to mobilize their state militias into federal service and send them quickly south. So you couldn't make the case for Carroll in the Tennessee River campaign if you didn't have a link between Washington and St. Louis. So Thomas Scott being sent west to organize reinforcements for Grant and Foote was a really critical link. And if those reinforcements had not been sent, the whole plan would have fallen apart and had failed. So part of the contention of Carroll's case, which Frank will discuss more, is that most historians till this day said, no, it was genius Ulysses Grant who planned the whole thing and implemented the whole thing, which even leaving Carroll out of the case is not true. because, for instance, Flag Officer Foote took Fort Henry. Also, Carroll's plan differed from Grant and Halleck. She said take the Memphis-Charleston Railroad as your main objective. They took Fort Henry. So her idea was a little different. So anyway, so she tries, so now the war is 1863. She still owed money for her publications, the pamphlets she wrote. She went out to St. Louis at her own expense. So Wade says to her after the war, when the War Department has been kicking this around, her money or claim around for 3 years, he says, come to the Congress and you deserve more than just the payment for your reimbursement. You've expended money on your own behalf. So even though some people, and Frank will discuss more, have tried to accuse her of bilking money out of the federal government, figures as high as $250,000 and $50,000, she never asked for a certain amount. Her first memorial to Congress didn't specify an amount. Jacob Howard's committee in the Senate that reported out specified $5,000. That's all the money that she ever asked for, in spite of what people have tried to claim since. So again, she went through 27 years of congressional hearings even after her death. She had Wade and Scott testifying on her behalf, saying her claim, the Congress, 4 committees in Congress saying she was incontestably a case that was established. Meanwhile, during the hearings, originals of her papers are stolen, and they're such as the plan. And that's why people have tried to claim that she never even wrote a plan, it never existed. Around 1880, she suffered a stroke and lingered between life and death for about 3 years. So I'm sure that was partly due to the stress of the hearings and the financial situation she was in. A lawyer took up her case in 1880. By 1890, she had become a national cause celebre of the suffragette movement. They went on a national fundraising and petition drive on her behalf, testified before Congress, women's groups all over the country. She was making the national press. Still to this day, she's probably the longest individual case ever heard before the Congress, and her claim is still outstanding. And even though, again, 4 committees to Congress reported favorably on the facts of her case. So the reality is there never was a controversy about Anna Ella Carroll. The Congress, however, as a whole, didn't vote for relief. Frank and I and a lawyer believe there are 3 major reasons. Number 1, there are a lot of ex-military officers in the Congress who clearly were jealous just between themselves, let alone wanting a woman to get recognition for a major strategic advance of the Civil War, and being an expert on the war powers of the president. Secondly, during some of the hearings, Grant was president. Probably some people feared what he would do to them. He voted for her and take his credit away. But her lawyer, Warden, mainly believed that the Congress didn't vote her a bill and relief was because she was supported by the suffragists. In other words, a vote for Carroll, and she had actually, the suffragists had commissioned a biography of her that came out in 1891. She was appointed National Vice Chairman of the Women's Suffrage Association. And so a vote for Carroll in the congressman's mind would be a vote for suffrage. And of course, Anna Ella Carroll, being both politician and military thinker, was the perfect reason why women should get the vote. So Anna Ella Carroll died in invalid, supported by her sister, who was teaching in Washington, and the funds raised by the women's and men's and women's union veterans organizations. And she died in poverty and obscurity, and still to this day she's obscure because no major historian has written about Anna Ella Carroll in any substantive way, and other people, as Frank will discuss, have accused her of being a criminal. So that's my talk. So I think you can see that in some ways she was assaulted by the Congress, being the first woman whose military legitimacy was considered at the national level.
Our next speaker will be Frank Bittner, and he is the chair of Friends of Anna Ella Carroll, and by trade he's a telecommunications and broadcast engineer. After moving from Baltimore to Dorchester County in 1998, Frank learned of Anna Ella Carroll, who's buried in a local church cemetery. He came in contact with many other residents who had knowledge of Carroll's life, story, which was passed down by older members of her family and is included in the history that's taught in the schools in that area. The evidence of Carroll's work and the tenacity of the people in the community moved Frank to become a central point person for the Friends of Anna Ella Carroll organization. The first Anna Ella Carroll organization group formed in 1894, shortly after Carroll's burial, when a group of Union veterans began meeting annually on a regular basis for memorial tribute to her. Their observance continued until the 1960s. Early in Frank's career, he volunteered with Baltimore community organizations on various inner-city projects, and he served as a liaison to the Mayor's Office of Special Projects under Mayor William D. Schaefer, working directly with key staffers, designing and coordinating programs that promoted the city's inner harbor renaissance and revitalization.
This is a little bit of her story, and I call it the story of her story as told by the Friends of Anna Ella Carroll. I'm the only one of the friends here today because most of them, there's a few in their 60s, but the majority of them are in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. And if you saw up here me typing, I've been putting this off for 3 years. And a lot of this just came out of my head last night and today. So if you'll bear with me. You know, a researcher writing about 18th and 19th century individuals that were raised on the Eastern Shore and played a significant role in American history asked me, what is it about this place that made it possible to produce so many truly remarkable people from a relatively small community? I don't know. In 1890, shortly before Anna Ella Carroll's death, there was only one book that had been published about her. It was a biography by Sarah Ellen Blackwell, and it was initiated by the National Women's Suffrage Association, of which Carroll was an honorary vice president. At the time, Carroll had spent the last 20 years of her life petitioning Congress unsuccessfully and testifying before 4 separate congressional military hearing committees. And she was seeking reimbursement of expenses and an Atta Girl recognition for the contributions that she had made during the national crisis, Civil War. Every one of those committees, even one headed by a respected Army general, agreed with Carroll. Only one of them didn't recommend compensation as a monetary amount. And none of which has the United States Congress chosen to act upon any of these recommendations to this very day, almost 140 years later. Carroll's lawyer, William Morden, believed that the men in Congress failed to act because Anna Ella Carroll's case came to be associated with the women's suffrage movement, and that she represented the exact reason why women should get the vote. What was also clear is that historians who have ignored or defamed and or mocked Carroll's claims seem not to support women as a legitimate source of political, legal, or military authority. It was a blustery, cold February day in 1894. Ice lined the banks of the Choptank River leading to Cambridge as the steamer Avalon docked at Long Wharf. It was Anna Ella Carroll's final journey. Her brother and sisters honoring her wish to be buried alongside her parents in Old Trinity Cemetery. Other than family members, only a few close friends were in attendance. For in this close-knit community, the wounds of the Civil War still bled fresh for many. A monument at Gettysburg bears witness to when 2 separate regiments from this single community fought a battle. Brothers truly killed and wounded brothers, and friends and neighbors did the same to one another. Heads bowed in respect as the funeral hearse passed, some mumbling words like traitor, while others silently closed their eyes in respect. Few, if any, would ever go so far as to ever deny that Anna Ella Carroll was one of their own. Pride and patriotism still are inherent in this rural community. Shortly after her death, usually on her birthday, Union veterans from around the Eastern Shore started to gather at her graveside to honor her for the things she had done. Over time, their numbers dwindled, and they were joined by veterans of other wars, including the DAR. This observance of Anna Ella Carroll Day continued for almost 70 years. Out of respect for and from knowing the Carroll family firsthand, area schoolmarms began including Anna Ella Carroll in their history lessons about the Civil War. Some say that these teachers had chosen to open young minds instead of arguing suffrage issues with closed-minded husbands, church pastors, and family members. These acts preserved the only community in America who for almost 6 generations have continually held out hope for seeing a day when Anna Ella Carroll finally receives recognition due her by Congress that was recommended by Congress's own committees. These hopefuls today call themselves Friends of Anna Ella Carroll, and now you are able to join them on Facebook if you'd like. It wasn't long before her story was even included within Maryland history books. I believe that occurred in the 1930s. After her death in 1895, and after her death in 1894, there was an article in Godey's magazine, which was also an alternate book for the ladies' book, dealing with the story of her life. From 1895, a few newspaper articles now and then. The next thing that really happened was in 1938, MGM produced a short film lasting only 11 minutes. It was titled Strange Glory, starring Fay Helm as Anna Ella Carroll. It was shown as an added attraction in theaters around the nation, and it was presented much like a Ripley's Believe It or Not. It is available on YouTube. If you'll if you'll search Anna Ella Carroll on YouTube, you can watch that film, as well as lots of the other things that have happened recently with the Friends group. 1940. The progression. My Dear Lady was published, and this was a first attempt.
You want me to hold the books?
Sure, you can hold this one up. Okay.
Can't read a thing, but here you go.
It was published, and it was the first attempt by Marjorie Barstow Greenby. It caused quite a stir in historic circles. It's a fair attempt at telling the Anna Ella Carroll story, but they carried some research further than they really should have with their hopes. They did carry the research a lot further than was in the original 1890 biography.
And parts of it were also written as a fictionalized story.
In 1942, National Broadcasting Company, NBC Radio, on their Cavalcade of Stars, produced a 15-minute radio show about the Anna Ella Carroll story, particularly her petitioning of Congress years. And Anna Ella Carroll was played by, and of course it got knocked out of here, the lady that played on Bewitched, the mother, Agnes Moorehead, played Anna Ella Carroll. That is also available to listen to on YouTube, by the way. 1948, another book came out, Woman with a Sword by Hollister Noble. It debuted. It was a fictionalized version of her life story. Its author mixed fact with folklore, and it came at a time when people enjoyed having plenty of quality time before television. There were book clubs and reading circles that flourished in towns across America. And the Friends document investigator Fred Dellinger reported seeing on the internet hundreds of book reviews that appeared in local newspapers about this book during that era. The news about Anna Ella Carroll was beginning to spread like wildfire once again, but to a new generation.
And that's actually how I found out about her in high school.
And along with that came new interests, new research, and from time to time turned up more bits and pieces of incomplete information that some historians chose to draw conclusions upon way too early. Anna Ella Carroll's life story was about to get very complicated. Please note that prior to 1950, the only disagreement that existed over the Anna Ella Carroll story was between those who believed and those who wouldn't believe that women were capable of accomplishing such things. But with all the newly generated grand publicity over the story, it was about to get dirty. In 1950, mathematics professor and Ulysses S. Grant admirer and biographer Kenneth P. Williams, noted for writing Lincoln Finds a General, wrote in the Indiana Magazine of History an article titled "The Tennessee River Campaign and Anna Ella Carroll." He fired the first salvo in an attempt to discredit Carroll's role in the campaign. His most important conclusion that his man made was that Assistant Secretary of War Thomas A. Scott and Benjamin F. Wade, who was the chairman of the Committee on the Conduct of War, were just confused old men when they testified at Ann Carroll's hearings that Lincoln administration had adopted Carroll's plan. He further argued that a major reason for Wade was that major reason that Wade supported Carroll's claim was that she was a friend of his wife's.
And therefore committed perjury, because he had sworn testimony. So he perjured himself according to
Obviously, Williams' conclusions showed that he was of a mindset that his hero Grant should share no glory, even though Lincoln was commander-in-chief. Kenneth P. Williams was born in 1887. In 1952, there was an expanded version. By the way, this was Hollister Noble's book from 1948. In 1952, the Greenbees, Marjorie, now teamed up with her husband, Sidney, went back and reinvestigated everything again from the original 1940 book. And although they weren't professional historians and they didn't have a background in military operations, this outline corrected the research was carried further in greater detail than the 1891 Blackwell biography, and through their investigations they located a large cache of Ann Carroll's actual documents and letters at Ann Carroll's sister's Sally's house out in Pikesville, and also on the Eastern Shore in Nellie Carroll's home, that are now, because of what they did, those were not thrown out, those were sent to the Maryland Historic Society and they're now preserved. 1961, there was another book that came out, Lincoln's Secret Weapon, by Winifred Wise. It was a story narrative projected toward young readers. We're now in the 1960s. The last of the Anna Ella Carroll days were being observed. Nellie Carroll had passed on, and the last flame of hope for Ann Carroll receiving her recognition began to fade in Dorchester County. But it never really faded in the hearts and minds of those in the community that have still held out hope. 1976, Paul Boyer put an entry in about Anna Ella Carroll in the Dictionary of Notable American Women. It amounts to nothing more than Carroll's character assassination. He falsely accused Carroll of, among other things, demanding $50,000 for 3 war pamphlets, and also bribing Thomas Scott to testify on her behalf. Paul Boyer was a cultural and religious historian and did not have a strong background in politics nor military history. So somewhere floating out there we have a 1950 negative, we've got a 1976 entry and notable American women. Along comes Janet Coriel, who is now a professor of history at Wisconsin, Michigan.
No, don't say Wisconsin.
Michigan.
Western Michigan.
Michigan. Her college thesis was about Anne Carroll, and she published a book known as, it's out there, Neither Heroine Nor Fool. And so she published her PhD thesis, in which she appears to rely much on the conclusions of Kenneth B. Williams' 1950 writing, but she carries the assault on Carroll a few steps further by accusing Carroll of forging a letter to Benjamin Wade.
From Benjamin Wade.
From Benjamin Wade that explained Carroll's Tennessee River campaign to Lincoln and getting Edward Stanton appointed Secretary of War to implement it. This is that book. 2004.
124 pages of text, 700 pages of text, although 130 of Carroll's own writings.
2004, Great Necessities, The Life, the Times, the Writings, Anna Ella Carroll, 1815-1894, was published by Miss Larson, and from her military and political training, Miss Larson took a more holistic approach, re-verifying the information contained in all the other books and identifying the misinformation in all the earlier books. She even searched out the Navy records, which others did not. Doesn't it seem normal that the Tennessee River information, there should be something in the Department of the Navy? So Kay seems to have found it all. She even looked into the telegrams and the correspondence between all the key people for a 5-month period. So it really took some information collecting that. So we're thankful very much to Miss Larson, the Friends group on the shore. This is the book that replaces all books. In 2009, a attorney, PhD, philanthropist in Arizona, Tucson, just found the little book, Military Genius, the 1890 biography. He was amazed. Why hasn't anyone heard of this woman? He then sort of read the rest of these, and he decided somebody had to make a movie. Nobody's going to do it, I'll do it. And it just so happened that he was very successful at the time of the real estate debacle, and I guess a lot of bankruptcies were up, and he had a lot of income laying around at that time. So he hired a group from the local college in Tucson that had completed filmmaking courses to go into filmmaking careers. He was a playwright, belonged to a playwrights group. He was a part-time actor. You know, this guy doesn't watch television. He's involved in a history club, an actors guild, a playwrights guild. So he got a whole bunch of people together and managed to come up and spend practically $1 million making the first full-length screenplay movie about Anna Ella Carroll. The Friends group in Cambridge, I connected them together. These were all the senior citizens who have ever expressed sorrow and what had happened to Miss Carroll. These were all the people that learned about her in schools over the years, And from a neighbor telling me the story, and over the years living there, hearing the same thing from various individuals, I said, hey, there's a movie that's been made. Let's contact the guy and see if he'll bring it out here. And if it would have been done by a major studio, it never would have happened this way, but Mr. Bruce Bridegroom from Tucson said, I'd love to come out and show you guys the movie, and we all got together at the Cambridge Library in the cold February of 2010, and he showed it to the group, and they told him things that needed to be changed, and he took the movie back into the editing room and had it changed, and he gave them the world premiere rights. The group originally thought, well, we should show this at the high school, but everybody with the historic organizations in Cambridge didn't really want to take a chance on it because the loss that could be occurred. So the group kind of like all pitched in together and decided, let's go to the Hyatt Regency Chesapeake Bay Resort. And on November the 20th of 2010, we had a turnout of 1,197 people. In preparation for that, the Friends group did that in 11 weeks, which is pretty much unheard of. A lot of word of mouth. But in preparation for that, the press releases and the stories about the Friends, about the movie, information on Ann Carroll was printed in the Salisbury Times. It caused stories in the Baltimore Sun at the time, the Washington Post. Then it went on to the New York Times, carried on the wire services to the LA Times Mirror, the Dallas Fort Worth Post, and even discussions on National Public Radio. For 2010, with all of this attention, Anna Ella Carroll Day was celebrated once again, and the Friends group was asked to stay together during the sesquicentennial to represent Ann Carroll's involvement during the sesquicentennial's observance of the Civil War. We have another year to do that. The Friends' efforts are endorsed by descendants of Thomas King Carrolls that lived in Maryland. In 2011, the Washington Post did another story written by Caitlin Gibson, and I contacted the Friends. We referred them to Miss Larson, who is the most knowledgeable. Miss Larson, feeling that she needs to be honest,
And the cover-up is worse than the crime.
told her about this book, this pamphlet.
She was gonna find
You
out
can hardly
anyway.
touch that, can you?
So Caitlin Gibson did contact Ms. Coryell in order to show a unbiased in both sides. And in that article in the Washington Post, Ms. Coryell went a little further in the interview, calling Carroll a swindler, guilty of forgery, lying, and fraudulent misrepresentation. At least that's what's in the article. You know, recently, one historian told me that every professional historian's worst nightmare was being afraid that somebody, sometime, somewhere, is going to dig up a piece of information that proves they're wrong. I think that's happened. In 2011, also, Maryland Life magazine decided to publish a story about Anna Ella Carroll. Naturally, it should be something about a Marylander in Maryland magazine, I would think so. They hired a writer from outside of the area, and if you read it online, he pretty much relies solely on the information contained in Miss Coryell's book. Nothing from these. So it's not a very great article in the Friends' view. He went on to add that she was a bigot and an egotist. onto all the nasty things that Miss Coriel has had. Some of his information we think obviously came from the internet, and there's a lot of right information on the internet today, but there's also some mistakes that are out there. We're very thankful that Maryland Magazine and the writer did not have her buried in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which one of the websites does claim. So thank you for bearing with me. The Friends group in Cambridge, we still meet. We've been having an Anna Ella Carroll Day to some degree each year. As it started on or close to her birthday. And we really would like to see Congress finally come through and give her some recognition. Ms. Larson believes that the Purple Heart, which she has a petition that she's been working with, it has to be a medal or an award that existed during the Civil War. And we think of the Purple Heart for being wounded in battle today, but it was for a lot of other things back then originally.
It was originally for meritorious and dedicated service, and if that describes Anna Ella Carroll, I don't know what else does.
So the other thing also, on the Sodalter Maryland Magazine, he actually adds to the $50,000 that she allegedly demands, which we know that she didn't. For 3 writings, he said that she asked for $250,000. And that's in the Coriel book, but what it claims is that a river pilot who was interviewed says, in effect, that Carroll's asking for $250,000. He says she's asking for it, but she never did. No evidence has been found that she's ever asked for that.
I should explain the riverboat pilot. He was the one that gave her the technical information. He wrote her privately in 1870 that since he was one of the very few Union pilots working for the expedition, he was having a hard time after the war getting work. So he asked her privately to get in on her claim, and she said no. She said, I've written an article about you, giving you credit, etc., for your information. She said no, but it was, was my plan. So he went to Congress, and so Carroll, Judge Evans, and Charles Scott were all deposed before the Congress, and Scott tells the Congress that that it was his plan, that he had developed the Tennessee River early on. And so, when he finished, the congressman said to him, well, we don't quite get this story. You're saying you're working for Grant, and you have a plan, but you don't take it to Grant. Why didn't you take it to Grant? Well, it was early in the war, and you didn't know who could be trusted. But then, according to Scott, the riverboat pilot, because there's so many Scotts in the story, he meets 2 secret agents in a St. Louis hotel and immediately blurts out his plan to them. But he couldn't trust Grant. So, needless to say, a number of these committee members who had also known Carroll really found this a little hard to believe. The committee never reported on that hearing. You never heard about Charles Scott in the Congress again, and Anna Carroll went through another 20 years of hearings on her case. So that kind of proves that the Congress really paid no credence to his claim, and in his original affidavit he submitted to Congress, he said that he had heard that she had asked for $250,000. So that's where Sodalter got that number from, which took us all aback. Actually, I'm going, I don't remember that. Well, there was a good reason I didn't remember it. Anyway, so we had to, scurry around and find out, where did this number come from? What are they doing now, Anyway, so in the interest of full disclosure, you have to, there was the one negative vote, the case where Scott came to the Congress and said no, it was his plan. I also should make one other disclosure, is that having done my genealogy late, I'm actually related to Andrew Holt Foote, the Navy commander, but I'm a straight shooter, and I told a factual story. It does me no good to misinterpret facts about people's lives, but I'm also not a happy camper that people have let Flag Officer Foote out of the store in the Tennessee River. He captured Fort Henry, Grant didn't, and then they both went on to capture Donaldson. And at the time, Foote was a almost revered naval commander with a combat record in China, and he and Halleck were the two senior military officers doing the planning for the Tennessee River, and it was not Ulysses S. Grant doing the planning.
If I could add, one of the things that the Friends Group has been doing with a document investigator is to keep after new articles that come out and verify them for accuracy. We really are pushing for accuracy in what is reported. Unfortunately, you can't go and stop someone today from relying on information that was written 70 years ago by somebody who was born 120 years ago. So a lot of times it's very strange that when history is written, people's individual feelings get put into it. And so that's what we have been involved in most recently. Thank you.